Have you ever wondered what it was really like to spend a day in a Wild West saloon? The moment you step through that door, you enter a world of noise, whiskey, heat, and survival. Nothing like what the movies show. The first thing that hits you is the smell. The scent inside a Wild West saloon wasn't just alcohol. It was a layered, physical smell, dense enough to sit on your tongue. You'd smell stale beer that had soaked into the floorboards overnight, mixed with the sharp, chemical sting of cheap frontier whiskey. There's tobacco smoke, thick, hot, and oily, coming from rolled cigarettes packed with whatever leaves were available. Under that, your nose would catch sweat, human sweat, leather sweat, horse sweat, all clinging to the clothes of every cowhand, miner, and drifter packed inside. There's iron from spurs, dirt from boots, and sometimes even the sour hint of blood, usually dried, usually old, but unmistakable. And then your eyes adjust. You see the sawdust on the floor first. That wasn't for decoration. It soaked up spit, spilled beer, broken glass, and whatever bodily fluid a fight might leave behind. The sawdust also muffles footsteps so people can walk quietly even when they're drunk or angry. That matters in a place where tempers spark faster than flint. Then your body picks up on the sound. It comes at you in layers, just like the smell. There's the scrape of wooden chairs on uneven floors, the rhythmic slap of cards at the faro tables, the metallic click of bullets being loaded, not for violence, but because reloading was something men did absent-mindedly, the way people today scroll on their phones. There's coughing from men with lung damage from mines, boots dragging, coins clinking, a piano that isn't quite in tune, laughter that doesn't always match the mood, and above it all, the bartender was shouting to make himself heard. Now, we start the micro loops, your first real vignettes. And these first examples are the strongest because they define your entire experience in the salon. The first one, the drink you'd be given the moment you walk in, the whiskey, not the smooth, amber kind you know today. This stuff was raw, harsh, sometimes dangerous. The first swallow would burn like fire. It would feel thick on your tongue because many saloons mixed alcohol with chewing tobacco to give it flavor. Some added kerosene, some added burnt sugar, some watered it down so badly that your mouth couldn't decide if it was drinking or washing metal. The aftertaste sat heavy in your throat, warming your chest, but scratching it too. Most whiskey wasn't aged. It was rushed, distilled from anything available, corn, molasses, potatoes, and poured straight into you to shake off the cold, the fatigue, or the fear. In a frontier world where diseases spread quickly and water couldn't always be trusted, alcohol felt safer. In today's world, you're used to sanitized drinks, purified water, and clear ice cubes. In a saloon, your body takes whatever it's given. Every swallow carries risk, bitterness, and heat, but it also carries life. A drink meant alertness, belonging, a moment where nobody cared who you were as long as you paid. So if that first sip scorched your throat but steadied your nerves, would you take another one? Next is the sawdust under your boots. Your boots press into sawdust that crunches slightly, damp in some spots and gritty in others. As you walk, tiny particles stick to your soles. When someone drags a chair, the sawdust shifts with a soft hush like sand. Kick your heel too hard, and a little cloud rises, carrying the smell of old beer. Sawdust was practical. It caught spills, it soaked up vomit, it prevented slips, it muffled footsteps, so arguments didn't escalate too quickly. And it made cleanup at the end of the night possible. Just sweep everything out the door. Today, you'd step into a bar expecting clean tiles, polished wood, and mopped floors. But here, cleanliness wasn't the point. Function was. Survival was. Comfort wasn't a priority. Efficiency was. So if you saw that floor before stepping in, would you still come inside? And then there's the sound of gambling. Cards slap the table with a sharp, fast rhythm. Coins clink in stacks that wobble dangerously close to the edge. Dice bounce like tiny bones. The room hums with murmured calculations. Men doing math because their next meal might depend on this hand. Every sound is tight, tense, electric. Back then, gambling wasn't entertainment. It was survival. A miner could lose his entire month's earnings in 5 minutes. A cowboy could win enough to drink for a week. Faro was the most popular game because it moved fast and felt predictable, even though it wasn't. And the dealer, often the most dangerous man in the room. Today, you gamble for fun, maybe emotion, but not to feed yourself, not to buy boots, not to secure a train ticket home. In the saloon, the stakes weren't emotional, they were physical. Hunger level physical, shelter level physical. If you lived in those times, would you sit at that table knowing one bad card could change your entire future? Next is the bartender who's watching you. He's the first person who truly sees you. His eyes track you automatically, the way a guard dog tracks footsteps. He's wiping a glass with a rag that's already dirty. His shirt smells like sweat, old whiskey, and wood smoke. His hands are calloused, hands that have broken up fights, cleaned blood, thrown people out, and loaded a shotgun that's hidden just beneath the counter. The bartender wasn't just a server, he was the peacekeeper, the witness, the judge, and sometimes the undertaker. He could read a man's intentions by how he walked. He knew who was lonely, who was dangerous, who was broke, and who was pretending not to be. His job wasn't just pouring drinks, it was preventing chaos long enough for everyone to survive the night. Today, a bartender makes conversation, maybe mixes cocktails, maybe plays music, but in the Wild West, a bartender could save your life or end it, and you trusted him because you had to. If he stared at you with those measuring eyes, would you look away or stare back? The truth is, you don't truly understand a Wild West saloon until you remember what it felt like in your own body, how your muscles reacted, how your nerves sharpened the moment you stepped inside. That room didn't just surround you, it assessed you, judged you, absorbed you. And whether you were a ranch hand, a miner, a gambler, or a drifter, you felt the saloon the same way every man did, right in the chest. Because back then, your body was your first form of intelligence. Your breathing slowed, your eyes scanned the room. Your hand stayed close to your belt, not because you wanted trouble, but because you knew trouble didn't ask for permission. The next thing you paid attention to was the kind of men in the room, the cowboys. You could smell them before you heard them. The dust of the trail lived in their clothes, clinging to denim chaps and wool vests. Their sweat carried the sharp scent of long rides under brutal sun. Their boots were cracked from heat, their voices gravelly from dust, and their laughter always one drink away from becoming a shout. They didn't sit still. They leaned, paced, shifted, like men whose bodies were used to movement. And whenever they walked through the saloon, their spurs announced them before their names did. These weren't movie cowboys. These were young men, most barely 20, fresh from months on the trail. Their bodies were stiff from sleeping on the ground. Their throats were dry from cattle dust. Their nerves were thin from nights guarding herds against rustlers. The saloon wasn't a recreation for them. It was relief, a place to breathe, a place where you'd hear them talk about the same things every cowboy talked about: horses, weather, wages too small, bosses too strict, and women too far away. In today's world, people imagine cowboys as icons, symbols of freedom. But in that saloon, they were just worn-out boys with calloused hands who needed a drink strong enough to erase thinking for a while. And you understood them because you were often just as exhausted. If you stepped into that saloon after weeks on the open trail, would you walk to the bar first or the gambling table? Now let's talk about the piano that never quite stayed in tune. You always heard the piano before you saw it, a dry, jangling tune forcing its way through smoke-thick air. Some notes are sharp, some flat. The keys are sticky from spilled drinks. The piano itself missing a leg or is supported by a crate. And the man playing it, always sweating, always hunched forward, pounding out rhythm with fingers that had learned to fight the instrument's resistance. The melody wasn't beautiful, but it was alive. It carried the room, made boots tap floors, made men shout in rhythm, made drunk voices try to harmonize. Every saloon wanted a piano because a piano changed the temperature of the room. It kept gamblers awake. It made drunks generous. It drowned out arguments before they became bullets. It reminded lonely men that something human still existed out here, even if that something was out of tune. Today, you hear music without noticing it. But in the West, music wasn't the background. It was medicine. It treated silence before silence turned dangerous. And if the pianist stopped suddenly, everyone lifted their heads. Because even an off-key piano kept the peace in its own chaotic way. If you were playing that out-of-tune piano for a room full of half-drunk cowboys, would you stop when you got tired or play until your fingers cramped? Now, what about the girls who worked the floor? Their dresses were bright, meant to distract from the soot on the walls. The fabric rustled when they walked. Their perfume, sweet and heavy, tried its best to disguise the smell of the room, but never fully won. Their footsteps glided on sawdust with practiced ease. They always wore smiles, but their eyes told the truth, calculating, protective, sharp. They leaned close when they talked so men could hear them over the music. Their laughter rose like sparks. Their hands tapped shoulders lightly, gentle reminders that charm bought more drinks than beauty ever did. Most weren't prostitutes. Many were entertainers, paid to dance, flirt, pour watered-down whiskey, and keep tempers cool. They worked harder than most men realized. Their job was emotional labor in a place where emotion was dangerous. They memorized faces. They spotted strangers. They sensed tension before it crackled. A good saloon girl could tell when a man needed a smile and when he needed to be left alone before he snapped. Today, people romanticize them, imagining feathered costumes and easy lives, but you knew better. You'd watch them negotiate safety every night, using wit sharper than knives. Their survival depended on predicting men's moods faster than men themselves could. If you were one of those girls, balancing charm and danger with every step, how long do you think you'd last? Next is the temperature of the room. The saloon had its own climate. In summer, the heat inside was thick, pressing against your skin, trapping sweat under your shirt. The smell of bodies intensified, rising in waves as more men gathered. Your throat would dry out just from breathing. In winter, the stove in the corner blasted heat unevenly. Your front felt warm while your back stayed cold. The whiskey helped, but only in the way a match helps in a storm. Insulation barely existed. Doors swung open constantly. Windows rattled in the wind. People huddled near the stove or spread out to catch a breeze, depending on the season. Airflow was a negotiation between survival and smell. Now, you live in a world of climate control, steady temperatures, clean air. Back then, you adapted to the room, not the other way around. And the saloon's heat wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The hotter the room, the shorter the tempers. Everyone knew this. Would you stay in that heat, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, or step outside and risk the cold, dark quiet of the frontier night? In the Wild West saloon, there's a way men watched each other. You felt eyes on you the moment you entered. Not hostile, just alert. Men tracked new. Faces like animals tracking rustling bushes. You watched them too. Their shoulders, their hands, their boots, their posture. You could read a man's mood faster than his words. A slouched man meant fatigue. A stiff man meant tension. A man with both elbows on the table meant comfort. A man with only one elbow down meant readiness. This wasn't paranoia, it was etiquette. The frontier taught you early. Trouble didn't announce itself. It showed in body language long before voices rose. Every man in that saloon had seen violence before. Many carried scars. Everyone respected space. And everyone knew that respect was what kept the gunfire outside instead of inside. Now, you walk into rooms trusting strangers. But back then, trust was a luxury nobody could afford. You didn't watch people because you feared them. You watched because you respected what the land had turned them into. In a room where every man silently measured every other man, who would you be watching? Nothing defined a Wild West saloon more than the way it shifted throughout the day. It wasn't one atmosphere, it was several, stacked on top of each other like layers of dust on the floor. And your body changed with each hour. Your heartbeat adjusted, your gut tightened or loosened, your eyelids felt heavier or lighter, depending on who walked in, who walked out, and who stayed longer than they should have. And all of it, every bit of it, lived in your memory. Because a saloon wasn't a place you visited, it was a place that stayed with you. Talk about the smell of gun oil. When a man carrying trouble walked in, you smelled it before you saw him. Gun oil had a distinct scent, sharp, metallic, almost sweet. It clung to leather holsters, lingered on vests, and soaked into belts. When 2 or 3 men walked in smelling of the same oil, the air changed. Your neck tightened, your hand twitched. Gun oil wasn't perfume, it was a warning. Most men carried guns for protection, not intimidation, but the ones who kept theirs polished, loaded, and resting too comfortably against their hips, those were the men the room watched. Those were the men with reputations. You didn't stare, of course. You observed quietly, reflexively, because you'd learned early that the loudest men were rarely the dangerous ones, but the most prepared ones were. Now, the faint smell of metal means nothing to you. You pass through crowds without fear. But back then, even a whiff of gun oil meant choices. Where to stand, where to sit, who to avoid, how quickly to finish your drink. Your senses worked harder than your words. If a man walked past you smelling of fresh gun oil, would you lift your drink slowly or set it down entirely? Now, what about the shouts from the poker table? The poker table had its own gravity. Men leaned over it with shoulders hunched and jaws tight. Cards whispered when they were dealt. Chips clacked like bones. And every so often, a man's voice would erupt, either in triumph or frustration, cutting the entire room clean in half for a moment. You heard the tension in each bet, the breath held between turns. The shuffling cards weren't just sound, they were rhythm. They set the heartbeat of the room. Poker wasn't a hobby. It was a test of nerve, wit, and hunger. Men played with the money they needed, money they couldn't replace. A bad hand meant an empty stomach or an angry boss. A good hand meant a night of drinking, dancing, or buying a room upstairs. Everyone watched the poker table, even those pretending not to. Today, people play for entertainment, for fun, for distraction. Back then, every bet was survival. Men sweated not from heat, but from fear of losing. You didn't judge them, you understood them. If you were holding a hand that could change your whole month, would you play it safe or let the entire room watch you gamble everything? Now, in the midst of all the chaos, there's the drifter who always sat alone. He sat in the corner where the lamplight barely reached, his coat draped over his shoulders like a second skin. Dust covered his boots. His drink stayed full longer than most. He watched the room with slow, steady eyes, never hurried, never distracted. His silence was louder than any shout. Every saloon had a man like this, someone who came from nowhere and went back to it just as quietly. A rider who'd been on the trail too long, a man with a past he didn't name, a man who knew how to disappear. You didn't talk to drifters unless they wanted you to, and if they did speak, they spoke softly. Their voices had gravel, not threats. Although today solitude is a choice, back then, it was survival. A drifter trusted no one because trust had cost him something once, and the Salon respected that. So if you had met, would you nod at him in greeting or give him the distance his silence demanded? In most saloons, there's that fight that almost started but didn't. Voices rose, chairs scraped. Two men squared their shoulders. The room went quiet, not silent, but heavy. The pianist slowed his playing. The bartender straightened. People shifted their weight, preparing to move if bullets flew. You felt a knot tighten in your stomach, the edge of your nerves sharpening like a blade. The air held its breath. Then, just as quickly, it passed. One man backed down. Someone laughed. The piano picked up again. The room exhaled. Fights didn't always end in violence. Most didn't. Reputation did more work than fists did. Guns are rarely left in holsters unless a man truly means harm. And the saloon understood this dance. It had seen thousands of almost fights. Each one was a reminder that men wanted respect more than blood. Very often in today's world, people imagine the West as constant chaos, constant shooting. But you knew better. True violence was costly, risky, final. Even the threat of it kept people in line far more than the act. When the room froze like that, would you stay still or step forward to pull someone back? Now, the deepest part of a Wild West saloon wasn't the noise or the heat or the gambling. It was the late hours. Those hours when men let down the guard they carried everywhere else. When the day surrendered. When the night softened enough for truth to slip out. Because no matter how rowdy a saloon got, the last hours belonged to honesty. And you remember those hours more vividly than the rest, especially because of the stories that were shared. In the moment, voices dropped to murmurs. Boots stopped shuffling. The piano played slower melodies, ones with long pauses that gave the room space to breathe. Lamps hummed softly. Glasses clinked with the gentlest sound of the entire night. This was when men leaned in, when they spoke from a deeper place, when the weight they carried finally loosened. You heard confessions without tears, admissions without pride, regrets without excuses. Men spoke of siblings they missed, land they'd lost, women they loved, and choices they wished they could take back. And the room held those stories like secrets. The West wasn't a place full of heartless men. It was a place full of silent ones. You didn't share personal things in daylight, not on the trail, not at work. But after midnight, in the dim warmth of a saloon, men remembered that they were still human. This was where honesty lived. Today, people talk freely. You share your feelings easily with friends, online, and with eyed strangers. But back then, even speaking of pain felt like opening your ribs, and the salon made space for that without judgment. If you were there, sitting in the soft glow of those lamps, what secret of yours would the night finally coax out? While the stories are shared, there's that man who always sang at the closing time. Every saloon had one. A man who didn't speak much, didn't drink much, didn't gamble much. But when the night grew thin, he'd start singing. His voice wasn't trained. It cracked on the long notes, rasped on the low ones. But the sound of it held something that cut straight through every drunken haze in the room. It wasn't the words, it was the ache in them. His song filled the corners where shadows collected. It rested on shoulders like a hand. It made hardened cowboys stare at their glasses as if the answers to their lives were floating in the whiskey. Music was a memory for frontier men. A single song could transport them back to porches they hadn't seen in years, to mothers they'd left behind, to brothers buried along dusty trails. A man who could sing was a man who held emotional authority, even if he didn't realize it. In today's world, you hear music everywhere. Speaker systems, playlists, phones. But in the West, a single human voice was enough to quiet 50 men. One voice could soften anger. One voice could stop violence. One voice could tie the entire room together. Now, if that man sang a song that pierced straight into your memories, would you look away or would you let it hit you? And then there's the bartender's final sweep. When the night began to die, the bartender moved differently. Slow, heavy strides. A wide broom scraping through sawdust thick with the day's footprints. He swept in long arcs, pushing away broken matches, spilled tobacco, bits of bread, old shells, and the dust tracked in by 100 boots. The room smelled different during that sweep. It smelled like everything was settling. Everything is returning to the earth. When the bartender swept, that was the final ritual of the night. It meant the day was done. It meant whatever happened, good or bad, was wiped clean until the sun rose again. The sweep was more than a cleanup. It was absolution. Bars clean up out of routine, out of policy. But in the West, cleanup was spiritual. It erased arguments, it erased tears, it erased boasts and lies, and bottles slammed too hard on the table. It cleared the stage for the next day's stories. If you watched that sweep and heard that quiet rhythm, would you feel relieved the night was ending, or wish it could last a little longer? When the lamps dimmed and the music stopped, there was always that one man who stayed longer than everyone else. He sat with his elbows on the table, staring at a drink he wasn't going to finish. His shadow stretched long behind him. His face softened in ways daylight would never allow, and the room around him felt like a church, hushed, holy, heavy. Sometimes he was mourning, sometimes exhausted, sometimes just afraid to leave because the night outside is colder than the sadness inside. Everyone respected the last man. No one rushed him. No one asked questions. In the West, you gave a man space when his spirit sagged. You knew that because you'd been that man before. Today, people rarely sit with their emotions. They distract themselves. They scroll, they talk, they move. But in the West, stillness was the only way to confront the things you didn't want following you home. If you were the last one in that saloon, what feeling would keep you in your seat? When you finally stepped out into the night, the silence hit you so hard, it almost rang in your ears. After hours of voices, music, heat, and smoke, the cold open air felt like being submerged in water. Your skin prickled, your lungs expanded, your heartbeat slowed into something steady and personal again. You could hear the wind, you could smell the earth, you could feel the stars watching. It was the purest moment of the entire night. The saloon was chaos, but the frontier outside was quiet. And that quiet reminded you of where you truly lived, not in walls, but under the sky. The distance between you and danger or opportunity stretched in every direction, endless and unbroken. The night carried the promise of another sunrise, another chance to survive, another story waiting to unfold. You're rarely without noise now. Cars, conversations, electricity, constant motion. But in the West, silence was a companion. Silence was clarity. Silence was home. If you stepped out of that saloon right now, would you miss the noise you left behind? A Wild West saloon wasn't just a place, it was a world. A world where your senses worked harder, your instincts sharpened, your emotions lived closer to the surface than you ever admitted. You remember the heat of the lamps, the sting of the whiskey, the crunch of sawdust, the music that cracked, the danger that simmered, and the laughter that covered more stories than anyone could ever count. And now that you've walked through it again, step by step, smell by smell, sound by sound, only one question remains. If you had the chance to spend one day in a real Wild West saloon, your boots on the sawdust, your hands on a heavy glass, your ears full of piano clang and cowboy shouts, would you take it? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you want more stories like this, click on this next card on your screen.